At my father's retirement ceremony, he pointed at me and called me a failure. A moment later, a 4-star general interrupted, asking why the army had listed me as killed in action. My father's face went white. He didn't know the ghost he'd tried to bury had just come back to haunt him. My name is Major Vicky Frost, and I was a ghost at my own father's retirement ceremony. I sat in the back corner of the glittering ballroom at the Fort Myer Officers Club, my old field jacket still faintly smelling of cordite and Afghan dust, a silent accusation against the sea of pristine dress blues. On the dais, my father, Major General Richard Sterling, stood like a living statue of self-satisfaction, a titan of the Pentagon. To everyone else, he was a hero. To me, he was the architect of my ruin. For 7 years, I had lived in a self-imposed exile in Montana. But I had to be here. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to bear witness. My father paused his speech. His gaze, cold and sharp as a bayonet, found me in my dark corner. To move forward, he boomed, his voice dripping with false gravitas. We must leave the relics of the past behind, like my daughter Vicky. An uncomfortable rustle went through the crowd. A ghost, he continued, in a jacket that stinks of failure. She does not belong here. A ripple of cruel, polite laughter followed. My sister Amanda, immaculate in a designer dress, whispered to a senator's wife, so embarrassing. Mother was right when she called her a family mistake. My heart didn't break. It just turned cold just as the smug silence settled. The grand doors at the back of the hall swung open. General David Maxwell, a 4-star living legend, strode in. His presence owned the room. Officers instinctively straightened their spines. Maxwell's piercing eyes swept past my father without a flicker of recognition, scanned the crowd, and then landed on me. His gaze dropped to my arm where the edge of my Chimera unit tattoo was visible. A look of profound shock washed over his face. The room held its breath. Major Frost, he said, his voice sharp as a razor cutting through the suffocating silence. I thought you were all KIA in the Korengal Valley. The words hit the room like a grenade. Killed in action. A stunned, absolute silence descended. My father stood frozen, his mouth agape, his carefully constructed performance shattered. Then an old colonel in the front row slowly rose to his feet. Another officer followed, then another, until every single uniformed officer in that ballroom was standing. The applause began not polite clapping, but a deep, rolling thunder of respect. They were applauding a ghost. My father looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. And I knew, as I stood in the echoing applause, this was only the beginning. The betrayal didn't begin at the ceremony. It began 10 years earlier in the Korengal Valley, a place scraped out of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Operation Starburst was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission. The intel was a lie. We were inserted by Black Hawks at 04:00 hours and walked directly into a perfectly orchestrated trap. The sky exploded with RPGs. Men I had trained with, bled with, were cut down around me. My commander, Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man I respected, more than my own father, collapsed beside me, a dark stain spreading across his chest. We were caught in a kill box. I grabbed the radio, my voice cracking as I screamed for immediate extraction. The line hissed with static. Then a voice came through, a voice I'd known my entire life, but it was flat, devoid of emotion, and chillingly calm. It was my father, Major General Richard Sterling, from the command center at Bagram. Extraction request is denied, Chimera actual, he said. Hold your position. Maintain radio silence. Out. A final dry click. He had severed our lifeline, signing our death warrants. In that moment, a horrifying clarity washed over me. We weren't a unit caught in an ambush. We were a sacrifice. I was medically discharged for acute PTSD, my career and honor stripped away with the stroke of a pen. My father's final command came on a sticky note attached to the papers. Vicky, this is for the best. Let it go. For 7 years in the wilds of Montana, I tried. But after the ceremony, the ghost of Korengal began to stir. I became a hunter. For weeks, my cabin was lit only by the blue glow of my laptop. I dove into a labyrinth of encrypted files and finally found it, the medical file of a John Doe, admitted to Landstuhl 5 days after our mission. The x-ray of his shoulder showed a unique old fracture. It was Colonel Thorne. He was alive. They had hidden him away, erasing a decorated officer to protect a secret. The digital proof wasn't enough. I found my former First Sergeant Andre Cole running a boxing gym in Chicago. "Been waiting for you, Major," he said, his eyes dark and knowing. He explained he'd been forced out after questioning a command decision with my father's fingerprints on it. "That man doesn't want soldiers," Cole said. "He wants pawns." He opened a worn log book. It was filled with names of forgotten army of top-tier soldiers who had been medically discharged or pushed out after crossing paths with my father. I was no longer a lone ghost. I had found my army. My family, sensing a threat, tried to pull me back in. My sister Amanda called, inviting me to a family dinner at her Georgetown townhouse. It was a trap. They offered me a trust fund, a quiet 6-figure desk job, a chance to leave the past behind. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement. They were trying to buy my silence with blood money. The rage that erupted in me wasn't hot. It was an ice-cold, killing calm. "My honor is not for sale," I said, my voice steady. "And the honor of the men who died in Korengal is certainly not for you to purchase." My father's mask of concern evaporated, replaced by pure fury. "Don't be naive, Vicky," he snarled. "What value does the honor of the dead have?" I stood and pointed a steady finger at him. "It has more value than your entire career, General. You are not a soldier. You are a politician in a uniform." I walked out into the cool DC night, leaving the wreckage behind me. The game was over. The battle had just begun. The hearing room in the Pentagon was a theater of cold, imposing power, but I felt no intimidation. I wore my service dress blues, my medals polished to a high gleam. I was not a victim seeking pity. I was Major Vicky Frost, here to report a crime against the honor of the Army. Across the room sat my father, a statue carved from granite in denial. Beside him, acting as his counsel, was my sister Amanda, the picture of predatory competence. In the gallery behind me, General Maxwell sat, a silent 4-star promise that the truth would have its champion. "The floor is yours, Major," said the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I walked the committee through Operation Starburst, my presentation calm and clinical. I showed the faulty intelligence, the flight logs of the secret evacuation, the X-ray of Colonel Thorne's shoulder, a ghost made real on the screen for all to see. Amanda was on her feet constantly, her voice sharp with objections. Seeing her legal tactics failing, she went for the jugular. "Mr. Chairman," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension, "I submit into the record the witness's own service file, which documents a clear and severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the testimony of an unstable soldier with unreliable, trauma-induced memories." The room grew colder. "My memory may have been deemed unreliable by my father, Mr. Chairman," I said, meeting her venomous gaze. "But what about the memories of other soldiers?" On the large screen behind the committee, Andre Cole's list appeared, the Forgotten Army. Over 20 names of decorated soldiers, every single one of their discharge orders signed by Major General Richard Sterling. A wave of shock rippled through the room. "And now," I said, my voice dropping, commanding absolute attention, "I would like to play one final piece of evidence." The audio file began. My father's voice, calm and calculating, filled the silent chamber. It was a recording I had unearthed of him on a secure line. "If she finds out Thorne is alive, she'll start digging." Then came his contemptuous laugh. "Vicky, she's too sentimental, too much like her mother. She never understand the hard decisions. I built this career. I'm not about to let my own daughter tear it down." The recording ended. The silence was absolute. Amanda's face was ashen. Every eye in the room turned to my father. The Titan of the Pentagon had been outmaneuvered. He sat perfectly still, defeated. Then he slowly reached into his uniform pocket, withdrew his black Mont Blanc fountain pen, and with a steady hand, drew a single, thick black line through his own name on the brass nameplate before him. It was a deliberate act of self-erasure. A surrender. The aftermath was a media firestorm. My father resigned in disgrace. The official investigation widened, pulling more names from the shadows. But in the quiet of my Montana cabin, I felt no triumph, only the deafening silence of a battlefield. After the war is over, my sister's final venomous email blaming me for destroying the family was deleted without a second thought. A week later, a small package arrived. Inside was a faded photograph of two young men in desert camouflage, arms slung around each other's shoulders, a young Richard Sterling and a young Marcus Thorne. On the back, in my father's shaky script, he chose the wrong man that day. But not this time. It wasn't an apology, but it was an admission. It was the only truth I needed from him. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about absolving them. It's about setting my own heart free from the corrosive burden of resentment. My war was over. I sold the cabin, the fortress of my 7-year exile. With that money and some anonymous support I suspected came from General Maxwell, I bought a sprawling tract of land in a remote Montana valley. There, I founded the Aegis Training Group. Aegis, the mythical shield of protection. It wasn't a boot camp. It was a sanctuary for the soldiers the system had forgotten, the ones discarded and labeled as broken. We didn't just teach them tactics. We taught them how to find their own value again, how to rebuild the honor that had been stripped from them. A few months after we opened, a dusty pickup truck rumbled up the driveway. A young woman stepped out, her eyes a startling reflection of a man I once knew. "Are you Major Frost?" she asked. "I'm Sarah Thorne." She was Colonel Thorne's daughter. She handed me a small sealed envelope. Inside were her father's dog tags. "My dad told me to come here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He said if I ever wanted to learn what real courage looks like, I should come find you." The tears I'd held back for 7 years finally fell. My legacy wasn't my name carved onto a monument in Washington. A true legacy is the memory you leave. In the hearts of those you fought beside, the flame of hope you pass on to the next generation. I had finally found my something to fight for. Major Frost's story is for every soldier who has fought a war and then had to come home to fight another. One for the truth. It's for anyone who has been silenced, dismissed, and forced to become their own champion. Your story of resilience deserves to be heard. If you have ever had to fight for a truth that was buried, share your story in the comments below and subscribe to Chosen Revenge for more tales of unbreakable honor. *.